Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And this week we're going to talk about writing papers. But before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week has been good. Ralph and I are finishing a show that we've been watching that I've been enjoying, which is Avatar, The Last Airbender.
OMG.
Do you watch that? Have you?
That's been like my pandemic thing where the kids have watched it like 3 times through. And so I have watched it kind of with them through that. But it is like the most like inspiring, like they're just so into it and so excited about it.
I understand. There's so many fun things about the show. There's really positive morals and good characters, and the story arc all holds together really well, and there's of course cool element magic. So anyway, I recommend that for anybody who wants a cool awesome Nickelodeon show.
Did you are you going to watch the other one?
We have already watched Korra. The Legend of Korra. We ended up watching that first, just for some reason, and then we went back. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, the girls loved Avatar, but the episode about the bloodbending was caused a lot of problems with sleep and stuff that week, and so we looked into it and found out the Legends of Korra is a bit too. It takes things up a notch, so
it's a little
hold
older.
Off on that. Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
That's super cool, though.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I've been enjoying it. How was your week?
My week was good, and actually mine is sort of show related as well.
Cool.
Where the books by Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials,
yes,
are just some of my favorite books in the whole universe, and I adore them. And even to the point, like I'm quite like territorial about them, and the fact that one of them was changed to be called The Golden Compass in America, like deeply irritated me.
Oh, I didn't know that wasn't the original title. My goodness.
No, the original title was The Northern Lights.
And that sounds familiar.
I was even a little confused because I don't think the alethiometer is called a Golden Compass. Anyway, so I'm quite uptight about it. And there was a movie made of it years ago that was just no. I don't know why it just did not work. But the show, His Dark Materials, is freaking amazing.
I had no idea
that
there was one.
Good. It is just so awesome and enjoyable and wonderful.
I will look into that. That is a good recommendation.
Yeah, it just it's so good. It's so good. That's
okay.
Sorry, that's not me. That's my big critical review. It's so good. It's like really so good. But I guess the context of the movie was, I was going into it deeply skeptical.
Sure.
So like not only was it good enough but it was good enough to win me over from a negative viewpoint.
That's a great
all the way
point.
over to thinking it's absolutely amazing. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look into it. His Dark Materials sounds awesome.
Yeah, and it feels like a really good sort of break time thing to invest in. I'm all about it. It's super cool.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So, you have a quote for us today?
I do have a quote. It is a bit of a long preamble about this quote and why this is the quote I'm doing. So, do you guys know the Smiths, the band?
No.
Well, okay, so that's because that's us showing our age gap again. But they were a really big band when I was young, and me and Eric were listening to it yesterday, and the girls were asking us about it. And through the conversation, we were like, yeah, unfortunately, the lead singer kind of became a jerk. And they were like, but why did he become a jerk? And we were having this whole conversation about how basically rich people are just bad. And that's just the way it is. And once people get rich enough, they become bad. And Alva and Sive were like, wow, but that's not really true, is it? And I was like, it is true, unfortunately. Once people get rich, they're like, no, but what about the guy? So one of them was like, what about Dolly Parton? And the other one was like, what about that Irish guy? And I was like, oh, you guys are right. And they reminded me that is not true. So
how nice.
I think it sort of shows something about my mindset at the moment where I'm like, no, everybody is bad. That's just the way it is. And then I need to remember. But the person, so obviously Dolly Parton is amazing. And the other person they were talking about is called Chuck Feeney. And he is an Irish-American businessman who became super uber rich back in the day through duty free Do you guys know what duty free is?
That's like you buy alcohol in between borders or something?
Yeah, and like so he became super, super rich, and then he read this article about charity and like, basically how it's good for the soul. And he committed to giving away every single penny of his fortune before he died. And that was his goal. And this year he has succeeded in giving away all of his fortune.
Cool.
And for years he did it anonymously through, like, he didn't want people to know it was him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only through some lawsuit from an ex-business partner, like, it came out who he was.
Oh.
And he invested huge amounts of money in Irish education and
Cool.
universities. And he's just like this really interesting character. And he was extremely frugal and like he only ever had like a $20 Casio watch.
Mm-hmm.
And like he carried all of his papers in a plastic bag and like never, but he also made a very impassioned plea this year to like other bazillionaires to like give away their money. Like, you can't possibly spend all of it, so why not like enrich the lives of others? Anyway, so his quote, sorry, that was a very long preamble to the quote, but his quote is, "Money has an attraction for some people, but you can't wear 2 pairs of shoes at one time." And so I always really liked that when I heard it before, because it's true, right? Like, you literally can't wear more than
Only
one pair
got
of
2
shoes at a
feet.
time. And so that was another thing with him. He lived in a very small apartment and he only ever owned 1 pair of shoes at a time until the other one, like, until they wore out. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not like, I'm not going to those extremes. Like, I have more than 1 pair of shoes, but it's just, yeah, it feels like an important thing, especially when the kind of wealth inequality has gotten quite extreme.
Sure.
And it's super cool to see somebody like, and what an interesting challenge to like lose all of your money before you die.
Sure.
Because you literally aren't going to take it with you. And so anyway, so I liked him, and I also appreciated that my kids have not been infected with my terrible cynicism.
That's great.
Remember
That's
that there's
great.
good things about the world. And so I like that because I had told them about Chuck Feeney months and months ago, but
And
I
they
like that they remembered it. And so,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, some people donate time, some people donate money. Those are all helping move forward things that
Oh,
are
totally.
good. So,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And we don't have to obviously all give away all the money we own or whatever, but it's just, I mean, it's an extreme case, but it's an interesting
Totally.
one.
No, that's awesome.
So,
That's cool.
yeah. Cool. Okay, sorry, I forgot what we were talking about. I was like, are we just talking about the morals of being a billionaire? And so, like, yeah. Okay,
so we're talking about writing papers.
Yes.
Yes. Go ahead, Ruth. What were you going to say?
Well, I think this one, I'm kind of looking to you on this one.
Okay.
Because you do this successfully, whereas mine is less so. So tell me, what has worked well for you? And kind of how are we qualifying this?
How are we qualifying this? I'm thinking about, you've done some research. You now want to make it into a product that tells a story and advances science in some way, and you publish it so that other people can read that advancement.
Yes. Okay.
Cool. Yeah,
yours
and
is
kind
much
of
more noble. I'm like, so we do this so we get tenure, right? Isn't that the point? But like, yes, what you said is better.
And just so where I'm at, my research is very collaborative. So a lot of times I get some data and I start looking at it, but maybe other people are looking at it too because we're doing this collaborative project. And so I've been involved. The vast majority of my papers are someone else took the lead, but my data was involved and my interpretations were a little bit in there. But I'm kind of talking about the papers that I'm taking the lead on, where I have the data and I'm trying to make interpretations. And of course, other people are collaborating as well, but that's kind of what I'm talking about in this episode. So what works for me with that? I love it when I get in the state where I end up getting excited about the data and I'm like really thinking it through. Like, there are only 5 options here. Option A, we've eliminated with this data set, like going through logically and organized. So delving into the story and getting excited about it. And I think that works. I can more likely get to that state if I'm immersing myself in the data and the concepts and really thinking it through. Using the paper. The paper is actually really helpful. The need of writing it is what often gets me into that organized state, where I'm like, well, let's just really lay it out here. I need to explain it to the readers, and then I understand it much better. So,
Isn't it funny, right, how we don't know? Like, that's what we do with students, right, when we give them midterms and stuff. Like, we're trying to crystallize things, but we don't notice that that's true for, I mean, you do because you just said it, but
Well,
often
that's
you're
a really
like,
good point.
like when you don't have the midterm, you're not going to, like, yeah, anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yes,
But I just,
yes, no, totally. Yeah, so using the paper to put my finger on explicitly what we can take away with confidence from this new information and what questions remain. And I noticed while thinking about this that it's really similar to writing proposals to me. Like, it's the same concept, just at a different stage, you know? You need to get everything organized and logical and figure out what the takeaways are. And in my memories of writing proposals, it's therefore we need this information to answer the question and eliminate some options so we can know something. Or if you have the data, then it's, well, with this data, we are down to these remaining options and this is the next steps, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're either proposing to test the options or use the data that you have to narrow in on those options. So anyway, I guess I was interested to realize that proposal writing and paper writing are similar in that way of, for me, crystallizing the ideas, and also that really what I want to get to is that excited state where I'm saying, oh man, I think this is how it works. There's a couple other ways it could work. Let's try to eliminate those or test the one So that's
cool.
That's what I'm into. As opposed to what I often feel like is like, I need to get this paper out because I have this data and it hasn't been published. So I need to instead focus on the actual science that I'm actually excited about.
I think I did a very dramatic sigh there where you were talking about, which is not unusual for me, but it was when you were talking about kind of just getting into that zone.
Yes.
And it feels, I mean, part of just the whole thing is it's really hard to do that now with teaching and just kind of going into almost that like right before I was writing my PhD thesis, like you just like, I see all the connections because you're so immersed in it. And it's definitely, I find it, you know, maybe for me, borderline impossible at the moment to get into that state where you're like, whoa, it's all coming together. And because it's just hard, you don't ever spend 100% of your time on this thing anymore. And so, yeah, that's tricky.
That's what I'm working on. But first, what is working for you?
Okay, working for me was, I had a student last semester who was just incredibly motivated to submit a paper to our on-campus journal, it is peer-reviewed, and so, you know, definitely counts. And so that was great, actually, and it's not something I think I would have motivated, but they were like, let's do this thing, and they really rallied and made it work. And it was interesting because there was another student heard about this and was like, oh, me too, and that experience with them was less optimal, but, you know, it was definitely cool, and it's not something I would have necessarily rallied. So that was super cool. I think when you have a student who's really motivated to sort of pull all the threads together, that's really cool to do. Totally. And like what happened with you, it actually crystallized a lot of stuff for us and kind of was motivating. And in a way, it was sort of like, oh, maybe we have done more than I thought we did.
Sure.
Because it's actually, you know, and I think too, for me, we have in our department as part of like their capstone, they have to do a senior thesis, and students will often do their senior thesis or their senior seminar on what they did research with you.
Okay.
And sometimes through those talks, I'm like, well, hang on, there is a narrative here. Like we have got a story to tell.
Yes.
And it's hard to see that through weekly meetings, you know, it just doesn't all pull together. So it's super cool, I think, to do that.
Totally.
And as much as I sort of feel grumpy sometimes about tenure requirements, like sometimes it's good in a way because genuinely I'm not sure if I would have, you know, motivated to do it. So that can be good. And then one thing I have is like I have this paper written. And so that is something that worked well. It's written. That is like, but I haven't submitted it yet, and that's something I'm working on. So maybe I'll get to.
Okay, well, I'm interested in hearing more about that.
Okay.
So yes, what you're talking about realizing it's more than you thought, that you've done more than you thought, seems kind of like you realize how far back you have to go to start explaining it, and then you're like, oh man, we actually have a lot more steps than I realized because I was just thinking about the latest step. Or it's kind of like putting in the abstract to present when you don't actually have the data yet or something, but like you're at least going to put it together into here's our preliminary thoughts, which is going to be really helpful. Yeah.
Well, it is interesting too with the paper that I did get written, which I did a huge push to try and get it finished because I thought I could get it like sort of processed before I put in my tenure file. And then once I realized that wasn't going to happen, I just sort of like forgot about it. So I need to rally myself for that. But, you know, I'm going to give myself a pass for having maybe been a little burnt out after the tenure file.
Well, now it can go in your post-tenure file.
I know, yeah, for the next batch. Tell me, so what are you working on?
Okay, so just what you mentioned is because immersion in the data and the concepts feels so key, how to do it with the distractions and interruptions that naturally happen in the semester. There's lots of ways to do it, and it's all about figuring out a way that works. I have tried in the past scheduling an hour here and there, but that's kind of not really immersion. It could be if they're frequently enough together that you can remember it, but I've been thinking about how to make it be the main thing for some amount of time that allows the immersion. So maybe there's over breaks, maybe having a regular 1 day a week where it's my research time and no meetings are allowed, and so then it's, I can really think about it. It's also really helpful to talk about it with people. So I made a lot of progress thinking about the science that I'm working on right now, writing the proposal, and the proposal had a deadline, and, as you just pointed out, papers usually don't have deadlines unless you're trying to get them in for your tenure file or something.
It's like a personal deadline, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, but the proposal became the main thing up to the deadline, and that was really helpful. So I think making it the main thing, however that happens, I definitely think that needs to be done. I'm not sure. I'm working on how to make it the main thing.
Yeah, I think the thing I just always struggle with is the immediacy of demands of the teaching aspect of our job. Do you know what I mean? Sure. And also kind of the fact that, like if I sit down to grade all these quizzes, I will have a stack of graded quizzes done and then I feel good about it. But sometimes musing on writing a paper is sort of, I don't know, it's hard. It's not the same gratification or guarantee of,
sure,
I will get this chunk done. So it's
I think breaking it into chunks can be helpful, but yeah, a lot of times the chunk is like, sit down and think about this data, which is maybe less satisfying, but I think it would be, Another way that I like to get into it is be like, well, I'm just going to work on it for like 10 minutes,
I have tricked myself with that. Because you said it in a previous episode, and it works for me. It
works. And I don't even really consider it a trick, because genuinely I could stop after 10 minutes and that'd be fine. True. But if I'm on a roll, then I'll keep going if I want to. And come on, 10 minutes to maybe be on a roll, that seems reasonable. So
it's a reasonable gamble. Yeah, I like it.
But anyway, what are you working on?
I think my thing too is motivation. And I think I feel like I've said this a lot in this episode. I'm trying to be generous with myself and sort of like...
Totally.
There's definitely a lot of extra challenges this year. And maybe this isn't the year where I'm going to write that nature paper or whatever. And I can just, accept that. Here's a really stupid question. But I don't know how to write the cover letter that goes with the paper. So that was actually what sort of delayed me with the other one. And then I just sort of gave up and forgot about it for a while. But what information goes in the cover letter? And is it journal specific? And... I don't know. So I just was like, oh my God, how do I write this cover letter? So that was one. The other thing is, how do you know when you have a paper? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you know when, I don't know. And then just the sort of infinite permutations and combinations. So how do you know when you have a paper? How do you know when you have a certain paper? How do you know which journal it's supposed to go to? It just feels like, I remember my PhD advisor just being like, great, now we have a paper and it's going to go to this journal. And I was like, what happened there? Like, what was that thought process that made you realize this was in fact enough for a paper? And then how did you know that it was perfectly pitched for this one, not this other journal? And like, it just was, that all feels sort of, and I think, I have a feeling that it's just experience based. Like you just get a feel for it after a while. And so that is tricky. And then here, I have this really specific thing, which I'm not working on, but has come up for me in the past, and I'm wondering what your opinion is about it. So have you ever gotten reviews where it's very clear that the person who... Okay, so the review I got was, you left out this crucial paper from your references. And it was very clear that the person wrote the paper and wanted to have a citation. And it was not relevant to what I was saying at all. And my advisor was like, let's just put it in. It's the way to an easy life. Let's get on with it. And part of me was like, no, this is a grave injustice and we can't put it in. But then he was like, whatever, it's not worth. Has that ever happened to you?
I haven't had that exact scenario, but I've definitely, I mean, my approach to reviews is to say, like, I wouldn't want to say no to all the comments, but I'm totally okay saying, we looked at this paper, we don't think it's fitting for that spot, so we elected to still leave it out. End of statement for that one. You know, the next one, you know, hopefully you don't do that for all of them. That seems like that'd be unreasonable.
Like,
but
actually, this is stupid and I'm not doing it, so the end. But yeah.
Yeah. Or, you know, they suggested this, and we don't want to do that for this reason, but we did this instead to clarify.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know.
Well, because another thing, I have gotten a review back, and it was like, well, you didn't. And I was like, wow, this is just not even remotely the point.
Totally.
Which is, I mean, it's good information that, that was not clear.
Right.
But sometimes it's like, man, if I put in some random paragraph about whatever they say, it's going to just make my paper.
And you know the paper. So I think if your answer is, oh my gosh, that's off the wall, that's not related, then the answer is to clarify so that nobody else thinks of that wrong thing.
Yeah.
And then you just tell the editor that's how we address that comment. That's I feel comfortable doing that at least.
Okay. If this happens to me again, I'm going to get you to write my reply.
Okay.
Okay, sweet.
So let's see. How do you know when you have a paper and what journal? And another question I have to that is, I often wonder, okay, maybe this is publishable, but if I got another bit of data, would it be like much stronger? And like, should I wait till I have the definitive, we've solved all the answers to this before I publish, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. And like, okay, so say the paper that we did publish on our on-campus journal, I know the answer to this. Like, it's not stellar news that's going to like rock the world or anything. But I was like, is this a mistake though to publish? Because you can't just take the same thing and publish it somewhere else, right? So like,
that's true.
Are you kind of blowing this? Or I don't know. So I don't know enough.
But if you build on it, of course, you cite the one you just published.
Right. It's just, I think that the stuff I did for my PhD was not like massively, we weren't publishing all the time. And so I just don't really have enough data points, I think, to understand the whole process.
Well, you know what's happened to me a couple times is we're writing a paper and we're like, gosh, this is like convoluted and complicated. And then we suddenly realize it's actually two separate stories. And if we make it two separate, simple stories, it's just going to be much better. So I feel like, how do you know when you have a paper? I mean, at some point you have to decide to start writing it, of course, and you need some kind of story, but writing it is going to help you figure out if you did contribute enough, or if you actually have a lot of things that you just need to separate into separate stories, or what.
Did you hear that big sigh? I don't know if you
I did.
That was me, sorry, being like, yeah, you're totally right. This is always the thing with me. Like, I don't want to start something until I know exactly how it's going to work out.
Sure, totally.
Hence why I'm a really terrible experimentalist, because I'm like, unless, I know exactly what's going to happen, I don't want to try it. But that's the thing, I think. I always get caught in the holding pattern of like waiting to get started. And you're right, sometimes just in the mapping it out, it's clearly...
Yeah, I mean, I think... it's important that there's some kind of story that's like the center, but then of course other things connect on. And sometimes to get that story, I find it helpful to like have some figures and like write, this is what they mean. This is, of course, I mean, both of us are kind of where we get data and then we interpret it. At least I assume. Are you like that?
Yes, in theory, yes. That's what should happen. Dude, I'm feeling this challenge though from what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm feeling like a call to... like, what would it be like for like all of the many, many different projects you have in your head if you just forced yourself to like take one piece of paper and draw a few figures and write some really, and just see,
where are we at?
Nothing's catching there. That's not ready. On to the next.
Or, oh man, what we're really missing from this is this one thing, which now we can go very intentionally test, Yeah, that's what I totally.
Okay, yeah. I'm really interested in that.
You mentioned how you've got so many things going on. I think, yeah, we've talked about being very intentional about picking what to do. Like, yeah, maybe this isn't the semester to write the nature paper. So don't stress about writing the nature paper while also doing the other things. Or you're like, I'm going to write this paper and submit it to Nature or whatever. I'm just laughing because that's such a big goal.
Right,
but,
right. It's never going to happen. But maybe this is the semester that I can actually find out how to write this cover letter and submit this other paper, because that shouldn't be that.
And now the cover letter. I have never written one, actually.
Okay, that's good, because I thought I was just being...
Thank you for
so
considering
ridiculous.
my manuscript is what I usually write. I don't know if it varies by journal and some really need a cover letter, but it seemed like the times that I've been in charge of submitting papers, they're just like, you could, but it's optional. And
well, there was something with this journal where they've decided to do... I can't remember what the term is, but you know when you're anonymous...
Oh, really?
Like
the authors are anonymous?
Yeah, for the review process. And so there was something about some information that maybe needed to be in the letter that can't be in the manuscript that you submit. And I sent them an email, but it was we are still in the midst of the pandemic, but it was in the earlier pandemic days. So maybe I just need to follow up.
Interesting. That's cool. I've never been involved, at least as far as I know, with ones where the review process, the reviewers don't know the author. That's really interesting. That makes some sense. And
this paper is it's not like I'm not saying it's not an academic paper, but it's more about belonging uncertainty and sort of, so it's a very personal experience sort of
I see
narrative of like events that we hosted that were supposed to be to increase belonging in physics. So that also was super terrifying to write, because I was like, I have no idea what this should look like.
Sure, it's a new field for you in terms of scientific writing. Yeah.
And so it was definitely a little tricky to think about how to make it anonymous, because part of it was written from the student perspective. And anyway, so
sure,
maybe that's going to be my goal.
That sounds awesome.
This paper.
Yeah. I mean, and you can always submit it, and then they say, we need more of a cover letter. And then you're like, okay, fine.
I'm like, no, I knew I was going to fall down on the cover letter. So, yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
It's all part of like, you know, when you move out of home and you have to figure out how to pay bills and stuff yourself, this is like, can I just get my PhD advisor to submit this for me? And like, so I don't have to write the cover letter, but.
Totally. I feel like my advisor was awesome at saying, oh, here's the story. And I'd be like, okay, I'll go write the story. So I feel like I can get up to having the data, and then I can get up from having the story to publishing, but I'm really still inexperienced about the getting the story from the data moment.
Yeah.
I'm practicing.
Isn't that why our PhD advisors, like, they have to take care of us for life? Like, no, you actually signed up to do this forever.
Totally.
So, yeah. Okay, cool. This was actually... really, I say actually because I was like, I'm not going to have anything to contribute to this because I don't write papers, but I'm feeling a little more inspired.
Me too. I'm feeling motivated to do some drafting.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
We're going to be so published by the end
So
of next
published.
year. So published. Okay, cool. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows, or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.